This project is using some of these plastics eggs. I got a dozen of them at my dollar store for $3. I'm using one of these little pokey tools from the Dollar Tree and I'm just poking all the way through. I'm not going in a straight line. I want it to be a little jagged and ragged. And as I go around, I'm going to be able to then meet up with the pokes that I started off with and very easily just take a pair of scissors, cut in just a few of the little spaces, and I'll be able to just pop that lid right off. I dug around in my stash and I found this small little canister, and it's the perfect size for what I was looking for. I'm going to be taking the eggs and hot gluing them to the very bottom of the jar, and I'm going to go all the way around. This was something that I saw on Instagram and I just fell in love with it. I had to recreate it for myself. Now, I do have a little bit of a different take on it. I'll show you the picture here in a second from what I was looking at. They had it with some real flowers. I'm going to be using artificial, but that's okay. Now, when you're doing the second and the rest of the eggs, make sure you add a little bit of glue so the two eggs will also hold together. I grabbed this large wood slice that I have in my stash and a big blob of Spanish moss, and I'm just going to set the eggs in the jar just right on top of it. I'm not going to glue anything down because I want to be able to use some of this later on. That wood slice is like gold to me, so I like to use it for different projects. In order to hide the rings that show that it has a screw on top, which it does because it's a canister, I'm going to take some of the Dollar Tree twine and I'm going to knot it first. I'm going to leave that long piece hanging because then I'm going to be able to tie it off later. And I'm going to just wrap it around as many times as feel it's necessary to hide all of those rings. So it's going to be fairly thick. I will use some hot glue along the way just to make sure that the twine stays put. And once I get to the end, I'm going to use that extra piece of twine that I didn't cut off to tie it off in a knot, and then you don't even see any of the strands. In keeping with the rustic theme, I'm adding some little twigs into the eggshells. Then I'm going to add some greenery, some florals, and on the inside of the jar, I grabbed a little stump that I had. I glued that to the bottom of the jar and then added some reindeer moss around the outside of it. And I'm going to be adding something a little different to the inside of the jar. So you'll have to stay tuned to see what I do. In my last video, I made a really sweet little twiggy magnolia tree, and I made another one, and this one I'm going to be just gluing right on top of that stump inside the jar, and I think this turned out super cute. I am so in love with it. I'm really happy and pleased with this one too. I am going to show you how to make your own magnolia leaves. They are so expensive. I've checked on Amazon and different places, and the prices are outrageous. So I grabbed this little bush from the dollar store, and I'm just going to trim off as many leaves as I think I might need. Magnolia leaves are not shaped like this. So because these are fabric leaves, I can go ahead, use my scissors and create the shape of the magnolia leaves that I want. I'm going to cut that tip off so it's not quite so sharp and make them more into an oval shape. Magnolia leaves are sort of an orangey brown underneath, so I decided to use some honey brown acrylic paint that I have. I do have a little bit of talc in here, which makes a bit of a chalk paint, so I did only need to use one coat. You're not really going to see the bottom of these, but I wanted to make them look good anyway. Once the backs of the leaves were dry, it was time to paint the front. Magnolia leaves are a solid color. They don't have any variations in them. So I have a dark green color and it's a little bit lighter than I liked it to be, but I didn't want to add any more black or brown to it because I've done that before and I've just turned it into a mud color. So I'm going to stick with this green. It is a really pretty green color. This is a Dollar Tree wreath. It's part of a 2-pack. And what I did was I cut out the top rings because I'm trying to make a modern look magnolia hoop wreath, but I didn't have a proper hoop wreath and all of the little embroidery hoops that I have are way too small. So what I'm going to do is take some twine and I'm just starting by knotting it on the inside of that little wire there to hold it in place. And I'm going to take the twine and wrap it all the way around the top side of that single wire. So I had a bunch of string that was really easy to just push it through like this. I wrap it around a few times and then just push it together so it's nice and snug. Once I got to the end on the other side, I tied it off again, but then I also reinforced it with some hot glue on this end and on the start end. I don't know about you other crafters out there, but when I'm using these wire wreaths, I really like to have some more of a base to them. So I'm taking some of this nautical rope from the Dollar Tree and I'm going to wind it around the 3 wires at the bottom here. And that's going to just really help my florals and greenery that I want to attach have something to attach to. I started by gluing the end on with hot glue at the bottom, and now I'm just going to do the same thing as I did with the other twine. Wrap it around until I get to the end, and then hot glue it in place. I'm also gluing it a little bit as I go just to make sure that it stays in place. So here's the base of my wreath. I think this part turned out really great. Now it's time to start adding my greenery. I'm going to start with the leaves and do a few of them down on the bottom just with some hot glue. And the twine and hot glue are a really good match because everything sticks to it. So this is going to turn out perfect. Last year in the springtime, I lucked out and found some really pretty magnolia flowers at my Dollarama. They look so real. And what I did with this first one is I just tucked it underneath those 2 flowers. And now I've got this other one here. It's a little bit bigger, but you can see how pretty they are. I don't really like the way the magnolia leaves flop around so much, so I do try to tack them down a little bit just so they're more of a closed blossom rather than one that's wide open. I've added the second one facing towards the first one, and now I'm going to add a few more leaves. And I'm just going to keep adding leaves and blossoms until I like the look of it. I end up adding 3 full blossoms and then just a few extra little petals. The wreath is looking really pretty, but I wanted to add a little bit more texture. So I have this little trailing vine with little white flowers. Now I'm removing the little white flowers because I don't want that to interfere with the coloring of the magnolias. So I'm just going to place some of these little branches in between. One thing that is tricky when you're doing little hoop wreaths like this is how are you going to hang it? It's not like you can nail on a traditional hanger. So what I did is I took some more of the jute twine, and I wrapped around a little section. Now, this was mainly because there was a tiny little bit of metal poking out where it had been snipped off. So I wanted to cover that up to make sure there weren't any sharp edges. But then I also decided then to make this part of the hanger. So I just wrapped the jute twine around to make it double thickness, and then I left a little loop and tied it off on each end. This is a milk or water pitcher that I picked up at the thrift store. It has some beautiful lines to it. I love the handle, love the scalloped edges. For this piece, I'm using Home Decor Folk Art chalk paint in the color White Adirondack. This is a super thick chalk paint. I love it. And I really like to use it on pieces like this that I know I will probably try to sell. I want to make sure that the paint is going to cover really well. For the second coat, I'm going to use the same paint, the same brush, but I'm going to go in an across motion rather than an up and down motion. This is just going to ensure that I have good coverage and it will minimize any brush strokes. I went to my computer and I designed this label. I printed it off on tissue paper. This is white tissue paper that I just taped to regular printer paper, and I'm just going to cut it out as close to the image as I can. Using Mod Podge and a small brush, I'm going to apply a generous amount where I want my label to stick to. Then I'm just going to place my label on. Now you want to make sure that you have it in the right spot. Because it's tissue paper, you won't be able to lift it up and move it. It's going to tear. So you've got to get it on the first shot. But whatever happens to it is okay. If you get some wrinkles, if you get a little tear, it just adds to the vintageness and the character of the piece and makes it look really nice and old. I'm just patting it down with my finger to make sure that it's all adhered, and then I'm going to use Mod Podge again with my small brush and give it a coat on top. If there are any wrinkles or pieces that I think I can smooth down, I'm just using the tip of my brush and a pouncing motion just to kind of push that tissue paper right into the glue and make it not so bumpy. This turns out absolutely amazing. You don't even know that there's tissue paper on it. It looks like the label has been hand painted on. Once the Mod Podge is dry, I also give this a coat of the Rust-Oleum clear finish. I'm starting off with this cute little wooden bunny. He's got some embellishments that are nice, but not my style. So I'm going to remove everything on him and give him a makeover. Now, if you have a Cricut machine and you've tried the Dollar Tree vinyl, let me know how it went for you. I don't find it works too well. It's a little on the thin side, but if you don't have a Cricut, don't pass up the Dollar Tree vinyl. I got this awesome buffalo check vinyl from the Dollar Tree. I picked up a whole bunch of them when they were in stock, and I'm using this to cover my bunny. So you're not limited to using vinyl for Cricut. You can use it just like contact paper, and with the inexpensive price at the Dollar Tree, you've got lots of different options to choose from. I'm just going to flip the bunny over and use my scissors and craft knife to cut off all of the excess. The bottom of the bunny, so the stand of it, was a bright green. I painted it black just with my homemade chalk paint. And now I'm going to give it a little bit of a pocket. I want to be able to hold some carrots in there. So I'm taking a piece of drop cloth fabric and just hot gluing it into a nice clean square. And then I'll be gluing that right on top of the Dollar Tree vinyl to make a pocket.
I'm folding in the edges of the drop cloth fabric and using hot glue to hold it in place. And I am trimming off the corner a little bit just because it's a little bulky and I don't want that to interfere with how it looks once I get it on the bunny. I still made the pocket a little too big, but I decided to just gather it down at the bottom a little bit so it would have a little bit of a poof to it. You can see me pushing it into the center like that. I'll just glue it down and it will look like it has a little bit of gathering down at the bottom. I pressed the two bottom corners down first and then just kind of crinkled it and glued the rest of it down too. Now the top portion is a little bit at an angle, so it seems a little bit wider than the bottom. So I just have to push it over and make it nice and straight when I glue it down. And that will give me a really loose pocket to put my carrots in. I'm going to try making a messy bow again. I am starting to get a little bit better with these. I'm using some black and white gingham ribbon, and that came from Michaels. I've cut up a few strips of the drop cloth fabric, nice and thin, and I have this other brown ribbon. Kind of looks like burlap, but it's really nice and soft. I got these glitter carrots at my local Dollarama store. They're a little bit larger than the ones you can get at the Dollar Tree. Of course, I don't like the glitter, so I'm using my honey brown paint and a stiff brush, and I'm just going to kind of pounce on it a little bit, paint up the majority of the carrot to cover up the glitter, but I do want some of that bright orange to kind of peek through, gives it a little bit more of a dimensional look. Once the carrots were dry, I pulled out that green, funky little paper and added some of this nice sort of asparagus fern, or maybe it looks a little bit like rosemary, but I thought it was the perfect complement to the carrots. The last thing I did is add a little stamp to the drop cloth fabric, and then I popped in those carrots, and this project is done. I've had this wooden tag sign in my stash for a while. You can see that it already had something done to it, but of course I didn't like that or it didn't sell. So I'm going to go ahead and give this a makeover. I'm just going to give it a couple of good coats of white chalk paint just to cover up mostly the dark grays down at the bottom. I'm going to use this wood cutout hello that I got from a local craft store and give it one coat of my walnut gel stain, just using a brush to apply it. I found a piece of scrapbook paper that looks like nice, beautiful brown wood, and I glued it with a glue stick just on the bottom third of the sign, as you see here. Now I'm taking my rough sanding block and I'm just going to sand off the edges to make it look more rustic. I'm also sanding all of the edges right down to the bare wood. I want some of that brown to peek through, so I'm going quite heavily and making sure that you can see the brown, especially on the corners and the edges. Using hot glue, I'm going to put the word down onto the sign just above where the brown paper is on the white paint and just off to the side a bit. I've got quite a few coats of paint on this white portion, so I'm taking one of these wood cutting tools that you can get in a pack at the Dollar Tree, and I'm just going to scrape off the paint to bring the brown through. I don't like to sand when I've got this much paint on there because you just end up getting all sorts of scratch marks. So this is a really neat alternative to getting some old and aged distress marks on your piece. I'm using the same walnut stain and just dry brushing it over the white just to blend in those marks a little bit more. To add that buffalo check look, I'm using some of this gingham ribbon from Michaels, and I'm just going to glue it across the border between the brown paper and the white paint. I love the way this sign is looking. I think you could probably leave it this way, maybe just add a big bow on the top or just leave it plain, but I want to dress it up a little bit with some of my solo wood flowers. I'm going to use the ones that are called skinned, which means that there's some brown bark on them as well. And I have these pretty little tulips that I got in my last order with them. I haven't used them. I think I've had them for at least, well, I don't know, a long time. Anyhow, I'm just working through my stash of what I have left of my Sola flowers, and I'm also going to add some of this little sort of turquoisey blue color into it. I think that just adds a little bit of a different spring look to this sign. Once I have the flowers the way I want them to look, you can see that it's kind of asymmetrical. I'm not an even sort of person when I do my florals, and I'm going to be adding some of this boxwood. I took it outside and I gave it a light dusting of white spray paint to make it look more like a lamb's ear color. So I love the look of lamb's ear with the Sola flowers. I think that's the perfect combination. And I'm going to keep adding some of these little leaves until I get it looking the way I like. To bring in more of the buffalo check design, I'm using some of this gingham ribbon again. I'm cutting little pieces that are probably about 2.5 to 3 inches in length, gluing them together to make little loops, and then I'm going to glue it inside the floral arrangement. And that's just going to bring out a little bit more of a coordination between the florals and the ribbon down underneath hello. Lastly, I made a sweet little 2-loop bow with some larger gingham ribbon and hot glued that into the corner of the florals. I love how this sign turned out. You'll have to let me know what you think too. For this project, I'm using one of these Dollar Tree frames that have the wood grain in them really nicely, although they are plastic. I cut out a fresh backing for the picture, and now I'm going to be putting a piece of white cardstock right on top of the backing sheet, just using a glue stick. Using the Dollar Tree vinyl again, I cut out a strip of 2 blocks wide, and now I'm just going to be pressing it onto the right side of the paper, just folding it over in the back, really easy to do. And I'm going to do the same thing across the bottom, just to give this a little bit of an edged or a border look. I thought I was going to leave the frame brown, but then my idea evolved and I thought it would look better white. I'm just going to give it one coat and you can see all of that wonderful wood grain that's popping out, and it turned out perfect. For this portion of the project, I did use my Cricut Joy to cut out the shape of a mason jar. I won't be using transfer tape because this is basically just a big sticker. Don't worry if you don't have a Cricut, you can still achieve this by simply tracing out the shape of a mason jar onto the vinyl and cutting it out. I found a bunch of these sweet little floral rubber stamps at Michael's, and what I'm doing now, instead of using ink, because I don't have this color of ink, is I'm just taking a little bit of paint and spreading it out on a piece of wax paper, and then very gently dabbing the rubber stamp in, and now I'm just going to press it right onto my paper. Again, not too firmly because I don't want it to be too blotchy, because the paint does seep into some of the holes of the rubber stamp. But I think this is turning out really pretty. So I'm going to do a couple of different florals with this color, and then I'm going to add a little bit more of a gray into the paint to make it a little bit of a deeper color. Then I'm also going to use some of the other clear silicone stamps that I have. I've got one that looks a little bit like a lavender, so I'm going to add that in as well and just make a sweet little bouquet of purple flowers coming out of the mason jar. With the clear silicone stamp, I did tap it in really lightly and just made sure that it wasn't blotchy in any areas. So I did it a few different times. And then once I pressed it down, I would just very carefully just pushed down without moving it or shifting it. If you'd like to get some of these clear stamps, I'll have a couple of links down in my description box of ones that you can purchase on Amazon that are not that expensive, and they're similar to the IOD stamps but in a smaller form. Here's how it looks with all the different types of floral stamps that I used. You can see that some are darker and some are lighter. Now I'm going to be using this fan brush and just dipping it into a little bit of green paint and then just gently putting it down onto the paper, making it look like stems for the flowers. And then I'll also add some leaves. With the fan brush, I'm just placing it down. I'm not pressing at all, just letting it very lightly touch the paper so I get a tiny little line. To add a little bit more dimension to that bright white paper background, I'm using a chip brush and some dark gray paint and very gently just dry brushing along to give it the look of weathered wood or maybe just a little bit of age. I added a little ribbon to the front of the mason jar and put it back into the frame, and I think this turned out really sweet. Check out this adorable little garden box that looks like an Adirondack chair. I think it's absolutely adorable. What I am going to do to it though is change it up just a little bit. I want to add some legs. I'm going to use those large tumbling tower blocks that you can see there. They actually came from a game. But the first thing I need to do is just cut off the wood legs at the bottom so I have a flat, even surface to work with. Of course, I'm going to make him over by painting him with some white chalk paint. At first, I thought I would just do a rustic coat on it, just like one coat, kind of rough. And then I decided that I wanted to do 2 full coats and make him look pure white. Before I finished painting him, I realized that I needed to put the feet on because I wanted to paint those as well. I'm taking 2 of these blocks, gluing them together with some hot glue, and those will become the legs of the chair. I'm going to glue them onto the bottom portion, and I want the wood to stick out just a little bit around the outside of the planter box. I did use my Cricut Joy to cut out the word bloom, and now I'm going to apply that to the front of the garden box. It is going to pull up some of the paint, but I'm okay with that because I always like a rustic look, and then I'll just distress it to make it look even more rustic. If you don't have a Cricut Joy, you can definitely still do this with the letters. You just need to find something to either trace out or draw them freehand. I'm using a Sharpie oil-based paint pen just to trace around the letters. Some of the white areas and those grayish areas kind of got lost with the white background, so this made them pop a little bit more. There's a couple of different ways you could add some florals to this little box. It's already lined, so you could use some real dirt and put a live plant in there. You could use the floral foam like I'm doing, but you could also just set a pot inside, and then it could be real flowers or artificial flowers, and you could change it out for the seasons. I'm going to use these delicate little flowers that are on sort of a hanging and floppy bush. These come from the Dollar Tree and they're also available in a beautiful purple shade. I'm going to trim off the leaves because I don't want to use those. I have some other leaves in mind to add to this. I'm just going to poke them into the floral foam until it's looks the way I like it to be. And for the final touch, I'm going to add a double loop gingham bow into the front of it and make it have a little bit more of a buffalo check look. I also distressed the edges of the box and the rails. Everything got distressed, so it was nice and rustic looking. I hope you love this little planter as much as I do. I really hope you enjoyed the projects I created today. They were a lot of fun to make. If you like this video, please give me a thumbs up. That lets YouTube know that you like what I'm putting out there and they promote me more, which helps my channel grow. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button and the notification bell so you don't miss out on any of my future videos. Thanks so much for watching. Have a great day.